Can you connect the fracking challenges that we are facing here in our region with your experience in the offshore oil development scenario and tie it a little bit into some of the politics?
Well, I spent last week at a conference in Long Beach, California with the fracking industry learning how to circumvent California's water quality laws. They think I'm Charter Oil Company because I look like them and I dress like them and I sit through their meetings and I drink pineapple juice while they drink a lot of scotch. But the bottom line is fracking is an entirely other presentation. It's about 4 times as long as that one. There's a lot of disinformation out there, and I'm sad to say from both sides. But if we don't get a handle around it, any place that relies on groundwater in particular, 10 years from now is going to be really crying, because fracked wells tend to have a production curve that's very fast at the beginning and starts dropping off, and then you have to drill more and more wells and then frack again. And so this is an addiction model. And I would say that the more of it they do, the more of it they're going to demand doing. And it all is really emblematic of what's gone on the OCS as well with offshore drilling. We're into getting the harder oil to extract, which has a higher environmental cost. And in the Bakken Shale today, they're flaring about 50% of the co-produced natural gas, burning it in flares to get rid of it. That to me is insane. Pardon my French.
I think just a comment, having worked through the California legislature on fracking, what we found was the oil industry actually wanted us to be regulating fracking, because I think that they're going to be doing that as a specific technique less and less and less. And this depends on the oil formations and how it's locked into the rock. Yeah. What they did not want us talking about, and what we just passed and the governor signed yesterday or the day before, were some of the other acidization techniques where they're pumping sulfuric acid and hydrochloric acid in to break down the oil that's in shale to be able to then pump it out. So for Colorado, I know the conversation is around fracking. I would ask or suggest that the advocates really work with and understand the technologies that the oil companies are using, because they were trying to push us into an area that we would have put some regulations forward, but they might not have been useful, and especially with the groundwater monitoring and the other things we were looking at, because those other techniques would have gone completely unregulated had we not figured out that we needed to provide regulatory oversight over those kinds of techniques as well.
I happened to be in the Capitol at 3 in the morning in the 2005 Energy Policy Act when Richard Pombo was in the House from California and removed the Safe Drinking Water Act, federal regulation from fracking, frack fluids. And I remember thinking, and I was working on offshore drilling, and I thought, God, I hope somebody's watching this shit, because this is really bad. This is going to haunt us for the quarter of a century or more, and it is. They wanted the states to have jurisdiction because states can be bought and sold, and they bought and sold Pennsylvania, Ohio, they haven't bought and sold New York State yet. California, when I was with them last week in Long Beach, they were watching that bill in California, and they were gleeful that it might pass because it was not as bad as what they were afraid of. It's the lesser of evils. They will get the least regulation they can get. And in California, it's a little different dynamic because the shape of the former seabed is more convoluted, so the vertical wells are more what you're into, not horizontal extended reach wells. So the different kinds of issues in California fracking. And they had folks from Dogger, our division of oil and gas there, and they were holding off the Dogger regs to see what happened with the bill in the legislature. So they play, it's like a casino. They go in the casino, they bet on everything, and then they take the biggest winnings. And they're very happy, gleeful about what the state of California did. And there was an article in the Dallas Morning News just celebrating, and I think they got yelled at by their PR firms, don't celebrate it in the Dallas Morning News, but they're just gleeful that the Monterey Shale is going to be opened up in California now. No reflection on what was done. It was all that could be done. You do what you can, what's politically feasible, but the oil industry loved it.
Yeah, no, I realize that, and they spread money around at the right time.
Yeah.
And we're able to influence that policy, unfortunately.
Yeah. Other questions? Somebody asked Stephanie a question.
Yeah, I have one for you, Stephanie. It seems that you, in a way, outlined a pathway, a free market pathway towards sustainability. Do you have any comments on the role subsidies, industry subsidies have played in creating the current status quo, and what role they will play in the future, either through the elimination or the creation of new subsidies in kind of catalyzing this transition towards sustainability?
Well, I think a bit of what Richard talked about in terms of our own power to elect officials is going to play a large role in that. I don't work in the subsidy industry, but I fight against it as an ocean activist and as a conservationist. If we could get like-minded people into office that would subsidize the eco side of things, it'd work out a lot easier for us. Right now, when we talk about a free market approach, a private sector approach to evening out the economies of scale, and I said that I had skipped some of the more difficult parts. Subsidies are a huge part of that. And anything we can do in terms of grassroots activism to move subsidies as quickly as we can outside of the capitalist market, the better off we'll be.
Hello, Stephanie, I'm Carol. I have a question that seems very basic, but what is the best way to dispose of trash, like in the dumpster? You know, I mean, during this flood, all you see are dumpsters just packed to the gills with black hefty bags.
I think you know what I'm going to say. The best way is not to consume in the first place.
Yeah.
Clearly, we all do. Making sure that your local recycling and trash facility is responding ethically to your trash, to your waste stream is huge. I live in Evergreen, and I have visited and continue to visit on a regular basis our local dump. I watch them take it. I've followed them all the way down to Denver, no further. And I'm always constantly on Craigslist posting my items for reuse before they ever go into the trash.
Right.
Hi, Stephanie. I'm Stephanie, too. I read an article a few years ago. I live in Seattle, so we love recycling. And but there was an article, I think it was occurring in Washington State, that they were having a problem with so much recycling. We were being so efficient at it that they were actually end up throwing it back into the landfill. So any other comments on that, or
again, we need to stop consuming. It's a difficult conversation because I like to shop as much as any other mom and woman or person possibly. Not only do our recyclables wind up in landfill, but if you do take the opportunity to visit your local dump, you'll see them blowing all over the yard. They're completely out of control, so that's how they're winding up in our local waterways and streams and then in the ocean. So that's number one. Number two is the incredible amount that we're exporting. So that's just what Seattle faced was just the beginning, or Washington State faced was just the beginning of the issue. The real issue is something we don't like to talk about, and it's trash and what we're going to do to dispose of it in an eco-friendly manner. And right now, the industry has not been pushed far enough. We were talking before the speech started about how the plastics industry kind of came and no one innovated any further. We were like, okay, plastics, great, let's just make everything out of that. Well, the same thing happened with landfill and waste and recycling. Great, we either put it in landfill or we recycle it. That actually doesn't deal with the problem. We need a lot further innovation in that industry.
going back to glass, perhaps?
I would love that.
I know, just putting it out there.
Also, producing stainless steel in this country would be a really great start.
Can you talk more about the fact that's going on in Weld County and how Colorado specifically is dealing with the pollen?
Well, the easiest way to understand fracking is in pieces. There is vertical well drilling, and then they developed the technology to turn a corner quickly and head a long way horizontally, and that's extended reach horizontal drilling. And then you have extremely high pressure, large volumes of frac fluid injected. The oil industry's argument is that because you're fracking out of that horizontal drill trajectory, at such great depth below the water table aquifer, there can't be cross communication in their minds. Now, there are cases around the country. This industry will claim there never were cases, but there are cases of, that highly pressurized frac fluid at depth sneaking up through an abandoned well, oil or gas well, or an abandoned water well, or some natural fissure. But really, the sensitive area is where you're supposed to have multiple casings around the well bore, where what's called the annulus, the space between the drill pipe and the rock, where it goes past the aquifer, shallow. And the problem becomes there's a process called cementing. And this is not cementing like your back patio where you do a pour and it clicks and it gets hard concrete. It's a foam cement. It doesn't always cure right. And it can leave voids. And that's where you can contaminate the aquifer, really, more likely if you don't. And they say, oh, we have lots of layers of steel and the cementing is fail-safe. What was a major contributing factor to the Deepwater Horizon incident in the Gulf of Mexico? Was a failed cement job. It just wasn't tested, it didn't work. And eventually, over time, almost every cement job will fail. It's 10 years, 50 years. So we're creating ourselves a time bomb here. And then you're transporting this toxic fluid down, and what comes back is often radioactive, has radium in it. And where that frac fluid is disposed of, it's highly saline, because this did used to be an ocean even before Vicki got the idea this was an ocean. And they frack in the old oceans. And so it comes back highly saline with a lot of chemical mix that wasn't in it when you pumped it down, including radioactive material. And how you dispose of that spent frac fluid, or the blowback as they call it, is really important. And in most states that are doing fracking, they're doing a really bad job of regulating how it is disposed of. And in Pennsylvania, they've had incidents of frac waste, muds and things, setting off radiation alarms going into landfills. They were just going to dump it in a landfill, and they frequently do in those states. And this is obviously now prevalent in Pennsylvania, eastern Ohio, for gas, and then you get out into the Bakken Shale in North Carolina, it's for oil. And for California, it's going to be oil. And in California, we have about 60% of the remaining U.S. potential domestic oil reserves locked in the Monterey Shale. And it's not just where we've traditionally had oil and gas drilling. A lot of it's under new areas of the state. The Big Sur Coast, the Ventana Wilderness up around Tassajara Hot Springs, Carmel Valley, Monterey County itself. And then the shales head offshore. And they have different names, like Purissima Shale up by Santa Cruz. A lot of those offshore shales are now in marine sanctuaries and can't be drilled. But at Point Arena, which we're about to drop a marine sanctuary over, there's somewhere on the order of 200 million barrels of oil equivalent in the shale off of Point Arena. We're in a race right now with the oil and gas industry for time to get it protected before they get their hands on it to destroy it. And so it's, we're living in the middle of basically a war for our coastal waters.
Richard, I actually would like to ask you a question.
Yeah, oh, there you go.
I was at the Blue Vision Summit, and
Yes.
and spent time with a fellow Coloradoans talking to our representatives. And I'll be honest, I felt pretty drained and actually discouraged, which is unusual with this activist work. You can keep going, and there's purpose for it. And your particular presentation actually refueled some hope in me. And my question for you would be, how do you personally reach the unreachable? Because you seem to present that to others, that you have that capability. And I didn't get a chance to ask you then, so now I'd really like to have your secret.
Sneaking up on me. Yesterday, the U.S. House of Representatives passed a must-pass debt ceiling bill. In it is the end of Obamacare, as they call it, or health care for Americans, as I call it. And in it is offshore drilling. This is germane legislation, you understand. Offshore drilling in all of the most sensitive parts of U.S. waters that have been protected for the last 3 decades, are in the debt ceiling, must pass or shut down the government bill that came out of the House. This was news on the Hill Rags this morning. That's how I woke up in a bad mood. It's like, I knew they were going to do this. I knew they were going to do this. A lot of this type of thing, and I'm not being partisan here, comes from Representative Doug Lamborn here in Colorado. I know he's not right here, but he's down the hill here a little bit. He is the oil industry representative on the House Natural Resources Committee. You need to set fires in those districts. I know things aren't burning too well right now, but you need to get to these members that are doing the really bad things to your oceans, and they are very specific people. And if you want a model, Yoko Ono is the Sylvia Earle of New York State. She decided there wasn't going to be any fracking in Ithaca, New York State, in the watershed of New York City, and by God, she's doing it. It's possible. Not because there's great people in the Congress, partly because you've got a decent mayor in New York that doesn't want his water supply screwed up. But if you get to these people where they live, where they come home for their district meetings and kick a hole in their door and go in and mess up their desk, you can get to them.
I think we need to stick Vicki on them.
Vicki, we got a project for you.
Where you're showing that if you get the right timing, you can make a lot of mileage, right?
Yes.
In Boulder, we're trying to municipalize our local electric supply, and what's holding us now, ironically, is the same debt ceiling thing that Xcel, our local investor-owned utility, put on our ballot. So we've been coming from the local, really just depending upon doing something locally. And so when that slide came up, we're getting a lot of flack from people that are saying, oh, Boulder just wants to do this little thing. And we're feeling this will be a model for the rest of the country. Yet, essentially, what you're saying is we should be in D.C.
Both.
Okay.
Both. You create the local model. In California, we call it the barbecue effect, the barbecue phenomenon. We invented the barbecue in California, and it spread across the country. We invented the offshore drilling moratorium in California, and it spread first to Massachusetts and then to Oregon, and the next thing you knew, everybody wanted one. And it was all done mostly by the swing votes were all Republicans that were saving the ocean for 40 years. And then all of a sudden, something happened in the Republicans who were to save the coast and save the environment batch, even as governors and members of Congress. They all just got stampeded by the Tea Party into anti-environmental rhetoric. Do what you can at the level you can do it. If you can do Boulder as well with locally owned utilities, as you've done Boulder with bicycles, it looks pretty good to me. I have a friend who was killed in a hit and run, 40-year friend of mine, on a bicycle in a bike lane in Butte County, California, the day before Thanksgiving last year. And he was in a bike lane, and it was in a county that didn't really design their bicycle lanes very well. But I think in Boulder, he would have survived. And so if you can do that here, you could do it and it works as a model, build a model that works, and then people will emulate what you've done. That's what happened to us with the offshore drilling moratorium.
I would just also add that Boulder is not insular. Boulder's on DC's awareness. They're watching. The world, the way that I said that the world is watching Walmart to see what happens, Boulder is like a litmus test for local political action and environmental activism. And I think that you're on the national stage when you're doing something like what you're doing right now.
Great. Well, let's have another hand for Stephanie and Richard. Fantastic.